Hey, what's up, everybody? BDF44 coming at you with another video, man. So, my understanding is that the Phoenix Suns, if what I read was true, are going to try to reroute Jalen Green to a different team very soon. He's probably not starting the season with the Phoenix Suns. Because at the end of the day, if you saw my video, which should be still uploading right now, my take on this is, I don't think this is a good fit for Jalen Green. I don't think that the timeline the timeline ain't really the issue, to be honest with you. It's just the positions of these players. You don't want Jalen Green with Bradley Beal and Devin Booker for any length of time. And what you also don't want is Jalen Green to lose value in a Phoenix Suns uniform over the next 2 years in this funky fit. Because you're going to have to pay him, or you're going to have to trade him to ensure you don't lose him in free agency. So him staying a valuable trade piece is probably within the Phoenix Suns' best interest. I don't think that they can do that. I don't think they can do that unless they move him pretty much within the next 6 months. Now, rerouting him somewhere else is to assure he doesn't have any chance of being in this funky fit, getting hurt, or anything like that. But I probably would have waited throughout the, if I can't get a trade, I'm not going to panic, but I'm going to trade him at the deadline. That's what I'm doing if I'm the Phoenix Suns. But I think they're interested in maybe moving him now. Now, what do they move him for? I don't know. Who would need him right now? I don't know. Jalen Green is such a tricky fit because he's not a connective piece. He's a pure scorer who's highly inconsistent, still in the presence of developing, coming off of very bad playoffs, but everybody knows how streaky he can be. So you're going to have moments in the regular season where he's going to average 30 points a game for like a whole month. His upside is all-star. His upside is still very, very talented, very high, but I just think most people who look at Jalen Green have bad thoughts about him at this point. Now, he's only 23 years old, and you probably love him in a rebuilding situation. I think he's going to be miserable unless you put him around other athletes, just because when you play with a hyper-athletic team like Houston, you find yourself wanting to keep playing with those type of athletes. There's no team like it in the league. And so wherever he goes, it's going to be a drop-off from his teammates in terms of athleticism, speed, and youth. In theory. I would have said a team like Orlando, but now that they have Bane, they don't necessarily need that piece at all. So I don't really know where he goes. But I will say this. There are certain teams in this league that do need to get younger. Certain teams that do need to turn the corner toward a rebuild. And I would not be surprised if he finds himself on a team like that. Golden State is interesting to me for Jalen Green. For all the things that they have going on with their team, but they don't have as a hyper-athletic shooting guard. So that could be interesting. And in that free-flowing offense, he could be interesting to me. Maybe moving on from some contracts that they would rather move on from. Maybe, I don't know. That's interesting. A team like Brooklyn is interesting because they're pivoting toward a rebuild. He would be a nice, exciting player to have in their situation. So that's a team that I would just throw out there. Obviously, Minnesota missed out on KD, but I don't think they'd be looking for Jalen Green necessarily, especially with Ant-Man on the team. That doesn't look like it fits, but they're a team who missed out on KD, so I just look at them for any team type of trade. Pay attention to Boston. Pay attention to Boston because they are looking to move on from certain salary. And while Jalen Green is a hell of a piece to bring in if you're looking to move on from salary because he's going to likely be paid in 2 years, what he does bring them is a short-term piece that can keep them feeling like a winning team in the Eastern Conference. Somebody that they can plug into many different positions if you want Jaylen Brown to move to the 3. Because remember, it's one of those situations where they're going to have to move Porzingis. They're going to have to move Drew Holiday. So they need to be able to match that salary with something. If Jalen's on the move, I could totally see that being something that could be possible in the short term. And then when it's time for them to pay him, they just trade him as an expiring contract next summer. Boston could do something like that. It's a funky fit in a way, but while Jason Tatum's out, it keeps their talent level high. So they can feel like they're winning. I don't know. It's probably a stretch, but I'm thinking about who would be likely to ready to make a move. A team like San Antonio could potentially be curious, but I would say no San Antonio, only because they are in a position to draft Ryan Harper. Is his name Ryan Harper? It's not Ryan Harper, but Harper. Yeah, whatever his name is. Harper for sure. They're in a position to draft him as their shooting guard. They already have a guard logjam. I don't think Jalen Green was on their bingo card of players that would be available, but I don't think they'll be interested in. You know, a team that's interesting to me, the Clippers are interesting to me for Jalen Green, because at this point they're not going anywhere, and they need somebody who's going to infuse some type of future, some type of sense of tomorrow. They don't really have too many picks, from what I understand. None of their own, at least for a couple of years. So them acquiring a guy like him, maybe moving on from someone, I don't know who they would move on from to make that make sense, but that would be the type of thing that I would want to do from the Clippers. Maybe just bring me in another player and then start the process of a slow rebuild, starting with this move, and then see what happens from there. And so those are the type of things I'm thinking about. I'm not really sure if I would necessarily do that if I'm the Clippers, but that's the type of thing that I would be willing to do. But because this young fella is a shooting guard, it makes it tricky, because you find yourself wondering if you can find a fit for him. A lot of teams have shooting guards, is what I'm trying to say. So just off the top, those are a few teams that I think would be willing to wheel and deal right now. But I don't know if he fits any of those situations necessarily. Milwaukee should be interested in wheeling and dealing some. Definitely. I don't know if they have the pieces to acquire a Jalen Green, but they should certainly be interested, in my humble opinion. And that's what I think Phoenix is probably going to run into right now, is a team that don't really have the pieces that make them interested in making that move. Yeah, we want a deal, but we don't have the greatest fit, and we probably don't have the best stuff to send back to you. The teams that have picks, off the top of my head, most of them have their shooting guard situation solidified. I think a team that could be interesting is the Sacramento Kings for Jalen Green. I think that's interesting, because Sacramento's been rumored to maybe want to move on from some things. Some rather valuable pieces, actually. DeMar DeRozan could potentially be on the move. Domantas Sabonis could potentially be on the move. So I would say they look about as realistic as any team that I've said thus far. Sacramento, keep an eye open for them for Jalen Green. I think they may be willing to do it. Who else, man? Portland's a dark horse, because they have some things to move around at this point. So I would say they're pretty realistic as well. The type of athleticism they have with Shaedon Sharpe, they probably wouldn't mind removing Anthony Simons from their situation. If you're Phoenix, do you want to bring in Anthony Simons? You probably don't. You probably would prefer a forward of some sort. Jeremy Grant's contract is crazy. I don't think Phoenix should be wise for taking that. But these are the type of things that I would be happy to move on from if I can make it work with Phoenix, if I'm Portland. So Portland, Sacramento, guys are in that same range of that Phoenix Suns area. I don't think Jalen Green would be flying away too far, because the teams that look most realistic to me are likely in that same division, if I'm being completely honest with you. In that same division. Phoenix could possibly desire some type of center replacement. I understand they have Nick Richards, but Nick Richards is somebody who can afford to play some backup and not have it hurt the team. I'd imagine Phoenix wants some draft capital, maybe more second-round picks, maybe even a first. I don't know that Jalen Green can get you more than one first or maybe a couple of seconds. But you could probably see them trying to do something like that in a trade to move a 23-year-old shooting guard with real upside and athleticism. So, yeah. Off the top, I would say Sacramento and Portland, without having heard anything at all about who they'd be talking to, would be the teams that I think could probably make it work and be happy to bring in a shooting guard and give him an opportunity. I think Jalen Green would fit pretty well in Portland next to those guys. They already have the defensive players. He would just be replacing Anthony Simons. They're a young team. They got the rim protection and stuff like that can make it work. So I think Portland looks pretty good to me for Jalen Green. It looks pretty good. I don't know if he'd be happy there. I don't know if he would tell them he would want to resign there, which could be a big problem when considering he's only on for another 2 years. This year and next year, I believe, and he'd be a free agent. So that would be tough trying to keep him if you're one of those two teams. But as far as acquiring him, I think they got the pieces. they've been rumored in deals, and they're likely ready to move on from some of the stuff that they can make it happen with. So, you know, if I'm Phoenix, I probably want a center. I probably want some draft equity, or maybe Phoenix forward, maybe a forward, a power forward, somebody that can fill that position in the power forward of the future, something like that. Would be what I'd be looking for. You know, if I could swap him for Sabonis, that would be amazing. But if I'm Sacramento, I absolutely have no reason to do that. That does not make any sense for Sacramento at all. So that's not a real thing. It's going to be tricky to see a team that could use a shooting guard that has forwards to give you. You know what I mean? That's going to be a tricky fit, trying to find a trade partner that has that going on for themselves. Now, maybe you can create that somehow by getting a third team involved and maybe moving some things around that way. But I don't know what would be possible. I would have to really look at the trade machine to find out. So at this point, I would say, without really doing any real, like sitting down and doing homework, that it's probably likely they're not going to find that trade partner right now. They're probably going to have to wait to the trade deadline to move that player, Jalen Green. They're probably going to have to. I know they're going to try to reroute him right now. They probably have intentions of rerouting him right now, but I think it's a damn good chance they find nothing that they like. So that's my thinking. That's what I think. Could be a better situation outside of what it is I'm considering for certain. There are a lot of teams I did not mention. And anybody could pop up out of nowhere and just decide I want a 23-year-old shooting guard that can score 30 points. An athlete that can put pace on the floor. You know, I look at a team like the Pacers, and if they lose tonight, I don't know that Jalen Green necessarily fits what they do, but like I could totally see them having a role for him in place of a guy like Ben Mathurin. You know what I mean? Upgrade Ben Mathurin a little bit. I don't know. Again, small market. Will he want to resign there? You have to wonder. That's the thing about Jalen Green. He's been in Houston, a fairly mid-market, exciting situation, young players around him. I know he didn't want to leave there. I'm positive of that. And so wherever he lands, if he's in a small market situation, the chances of him wanting to leave that place is probably high. Probably high, man. So that's just what I'm thinking. New York be interested in a guy like Jalen Green? I know they could be rumored to be moving on from Karl Anthony Towns, but I don't know that I don't, in a nutshell, do they need to do that to improve their team? Not in my humble opinion. No, I don't think that makes them substantially better, but it does put an exciting player in New York. They're always looking for excitement. I don't know. No. Probably not the greatest fit. But, yeah, that's the key, man. Where would he want to resign? Where would he want to resign? Or does the team that acquires him right now find themselves intending to trade him at the deadline then? Because I'm telling you, man, if I got to pay him $30 million, I can't think of too many teams that are going to want to do that. I'm just being honest with you. And that's what Phoenix is going to run into. That's one of the reasons why acquiring him is potentially a little tricky. Because if you're intending to keep him, you may be able to convince him to resign if the situation's right. But if you bring him to a situation like Phoenix that ain't really desirable, when you try to move him as a trade piece, he may not be that easy to move. You know, it's one of those situations where you don't really know a guy's untradeable or not someone that the market would love if you're never shopping him, which Houston likely was never shopping him. So to find out that nobody wanted him or to find out what he's actually worth was never something they were intending to even do. But when you find yourself in this situation now and you're acquiring him with the intention of retrading him, you find that the market may not have favored that guy as much as maybe he was favored in his situation. And so that is what I think is probably going on right now with Phoenix, man. That's probably what's going on with Phoenix. They probably find out they picked up a player that you can't retrade. I would not be surprised if that's what they're finding out. So, I don't know. He's a polarizing piece, man. He doesn't particularly make other people better. He doesn't particularly play great defense. He is a high-volume shooter. tends to run cold a lot. And he plays the shooting guard position, which is a position that most teams have filled up. You feel me? Like, I don't think, like, just looking at it from the position I'm looking at, I don't think he's really that desirable of a player to trade for right now. Especially with him potentially being somebody you have to re-sign at a significantly higher price rather soon. It might be easier, and this is a stretch. It's a stretch. But it might be easier to trade this piece if you sign him to a longer term contract and then try to do so. I know that sounds wild, but how do you feel about Jalen Green on a 4-year deal at 23 years old, a fixed amount, if you're a small market team, knowing that you don't have to negotiate with this guy, versus having him test free agency and potentially leaving you for nothing while simultaneously being somebody you had to pay a lot for because of his age and his athleticism and stuff? Phoenix is going to want a lot for him. I think Phoenix will find out that him being on a 2-year deal is much harder to move than him potentially being on a 4-year deal. So I don't know. I might be overthinking this. I tend to trust myself when it comes to me reading the market. I felt really good about myself being able to do that over the last 6 or 7 years since I've been doing this channel. And I'm telling you, just off the strength of my mind's eye, I don't think there's going to be too many teams that want to negotiate with Jalen Green. If they're acquiring him, they're likely assuming either he's going to walk for nothing, as to which they're not going to want to give up too much for him, or they have the situation that's best for him and expect that he's going to resign, or intend to retrade him themselves. And if they're reading the tea leaves, he's not the best player to pick up if that's what you're trying to do. If you're reading the tea leaves, he's one of the worst players to acquire with the intention of retrading him in about 6 months. So, I could be reading this completely wrong. A lot of teams have assets that can make that make sense, or players that are desirable that they can attach next to him. Like, he was just a part of a KD trade, so he could very well be a part of something else big. Which I wouldn't rule out necessarily for Phoenix. But this is the type of thing where I don't know if I'm Phoenix, I actually pull the trigger on this deal if I foresee this being a problem. Especially when you have Bradley Beal on a no-trade clause, making his fit rather difficult to begin with. That's what I see there. You are having a hard time creating an opportunity for this kid to have his role make sense on your team, and you acquired him knowing that you'd have to pay him in a couple years. This is Phoenix doing Phoenix stuff, man. I don't know, man. I don't know about this, Phoenix. I think you're in a very unique situation to where the worst case scenario I see in my head for Phoenix is they decide they just can't create an opportunity for him without moving Devin Booker. They move Devin Booker, and then he leaves the free agency anyway. That's the worst case scenario. And they lose him for nothing and move Devin Booker. But if you can't move this kid, you're probably going to lose him for nothing. Because he ain't going to want to be able to play with... He ain't going to want to be in that situation past the time he's supposed to on his contract. And you can't move Bradley Beal. So this is a nightmare. It's a nightmare fit. It's a nightmare situation. And if my mind's eye is telling me the truth, they're likely going to trade Jalen Green for less than what they just paid to get him. BDL 44. I thank y'all for watching.